At my 30th birthday, my sister gifted me a bill, $28,000 for all the gifts we ever gave you. Everyone cheered. I opened my folder. Here are receipts for $340,000. Your wedding, your house, your cars. Her husband froze. That's impossible. The lawyer sitting at the next table stood up. Oh, it's very possible. You have 72 hours to. I learned two things at my 30th birthday party. One, my sister could turn a room full of relatives into a cheering squad with one well-timed lie. Two, I had been paying for my own humiliation for years. It happened right after the cake came out. Not my cake. The family cake. The one my mom insisted on ordering from the nicest bakery in town because people noticed those things. 3 tiers, gold lettering, the whole show. My wife, Mara, stood next to me with our youngest on her hip. Ben was 5 and already sticky from the fruit punch. Our middle, Ellie, 8, hovered close to her mom's leg like she always did around loud adults. Our oldest, Luke, 10, was holding a folded piece of paper he'd worked on all week. He'd drawn me on the tractor, big shoulders, silly smile, with our farm dog at my boots. Above it he wrote, in careful block letters, Happy 30 Dad. He was proud of it. I was proud of him. My sister, Tessa, waited until everyone was gathered. Until phones were up. Until my mom had her party voice on and my dad was already laughing a little too loud. Then Tessa tapped a spoon against her glass and said, Before Irvin opens gifts, I have something special. She smiled like she was doing me a favor. Her husband, Grant, stood beside her with that polished, corporate grin. He looked like the kind of man who wore cologne to a backyard barbecue. He held a thin manila folder like it was a trophy. Tessa said, We've all been so generous to Irvin over the years. A few people nodded like, Sure, yes, that sounds right. Then she turned, not to me, but to my kids. She leaned down and held out 3 little paper wristbands, like the kind you get at a county fair. 2 were blue. 1 was pink. She slipped them onto Luke and Ellie and Ben's wrists, one by one, smiling wide. Luke looked confused. Ellie's face lit up for half a second, like she thought it meant she belonged. Tessa stood back up and said, loudly, These are so the kids can come to the after party at the lake house. My stomach tightened. I hadn't heard anything about an after party. Tessa kept going. But there's a small condition. Then she handed Ellie the folder. Not me. Ellie. Sweetie, she said, syrupy. Can you read the first line out loud? It's for your dad. Ellie's hands were small. The folder was big. She looked up at me like she was asking permission. I wanted to reach out and take it. I wanted to shut the whole thing down right then. But the room was staring. My mother had that expectant look on her face, like I should be grateful for whatever was coming. My dad was smiling like this was going to be funny. Mara's grip tightened on Ben. Ellie opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with big bold numbers at the top. She squinted and read, in her soft voice, $28,000 for all the gifts we ever gave you. And that's when the room erupted. People actually cheered. My aunt clapped like Tessa had just announced a pregnancy. My cousin Jared whistled. Someone behind me said, Finally. Tessa laughed and threw her arms up like she'd landed a punchline. Grant leaned in and kissed her cheek. My dad said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Well, son, looks like you're paying up. Luke looked down at his wristband, then up at me. He didn't understand money the way adults do, but he understood tone. He understood when a room was laughing at his dad. Ellie's mouth pressed into a straight line. She tried to be brave. She always tried to be brave. Ben tugged at Mara's sleeve and whispered, Why are they yelling? My hands were shaking, but my face stayed still. Because this wasn't a surprise to me. Not really. Tessa had been keeping score my whole life. She just finally decided to do it with an audience. I took a slow breath and smiled like I was amused. Like this was all in good fun. Then I said, Okay. And I walked over to the gift table where I'd set my own folder down earlier. A thick one. A plain black folder with binder clips because I'm a farmer and I don't do fancy. I picked it up and brought it back to the center of the room. Tessa's smile faltered just a little. I opened my folder. And I said, Since we're doing receipts tonight, I brought mine too. The cheering died down in weird little pockets, like a radio losing signal. I pulled out the first page and held it up. Here are receipts for $340,000, I said, calm. And that's just the big stuff. Tessa blinked fast, like she didn't understand the words. Grant let out a small laugh, like I was joking. I wasn't. I flipped the first section open and read, like I was reading seed prices at the co-op. Your wedding, I said, looking at Tessa. Venue deposit. Catering. Photographer. The emergency flower upgrade because you didn't like the color of the roses. I slid the copies onto the table so people could see the numbers. Then I turned a page. Your house, I said. Down payment assistance. Closing costs. The bridge loan you promised you'd pay back after Grant's bonus came in. Another page. Your cars, I said. 2 of them. Because the first one was too embarrassing to park in front of Grant's office. Grant's smile was gone now. He stared at the papers like they were in a language he didn't speak. Tessa's face went red in that slow, creeping way it always did when she got caught. I kept going, not louder, not angrier. Just steady. Your daycare, I said. 6 months when you said you were between opportunities. Mom and Dad's roof, I said. New shingles after the hailstorm. Dad's truck repairs, I said. Twice. Mom's credit card, I said, and I looked right at my mother when I said it. The one she swore was just temporary. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My dad's smile was gone too. He was staring at the folder like it might bite him. Tessa tried to recover fast. She always did. She laughed sharply and said, That's impossible. Grant finally spoke, but his voice sounded thin. That's impossible, he repeated, like if he said it twice, the numbers would vanish. I didn't even answer, because I didn't have to. There was a man at the next table, someone my uncle had brought as a +1. I'd noticed him earlier because he didn't fit the party. He was older, neat haircut, crisp shirt, sitting with a glass of water like he actually had somewhere to be. He'd been listening. When Grant said impossible, the man stood up. He cleared his throat politely, like he was at a town meeting. And he said, Oh, it's very possible. Every head turned. He nodded toward me. Irvin asked me to come tonight. I'm an attorney. My aunt actually gasped. Like this was a TV show. The lawyer stepped closer and said, And to be clear, these aren't fun family tallies. Several of these payments were documented as loans. Promissory notes. Some were tied to property. Grant's face drained of color. Tessa's mouth opened, then closed. The lawyer continued, calm and professional. Mr. and Mrs. Larkin, he looked directly at Tessa and Grant. You have 72 hours to respond to the demand letter. If you don't, we file. Silence hit the room like someone turned off the music. And then, because my family can't handle silence, my mom whispered, Irvin, like I'd offended her by not letting them keep taking from me. Luke tugged on my shirt and whispered, Dad, are we in trouble? That almost broke me. Not the cheering, not the bill, not even Tessa using my daughter like a prop. It was my son thinking I was the one who did something wrong. I knelt down right there in the middle of my 30th birthday party and took Luke's wrist gently. I slid the blue paper band off. Then I slid Ellie's off. Then Ben's. I put them in my pocket like they were trash I'd pick up from a field. And I said, quiet but clear, No, buddy. We're not in trouble. Then I looked up at the adults, at the people who had been clapping for my humiliation. We're leaving, I said. Right now. I didn't yell. I didn't throw cake. I didn't make a speech. I just took my family and walked out. And that was the hook people remember when they tell the story later. But the truth? That moment only worked because of everything that happened before it. I'm Irvin. I had just turned 30. I lived outside a small town where everyone knows your truck before they know your name. I was a farmer. Not the cute, pumpkin patch version. The real one. Long days. Mud on boots. Broken machinery at the worst times. Worry that sits in your chest like a rock every time the weather shifts. I was married to Mara. She was the kind of woman who didn't waste words and didn't miss details. We had 3 kids. Luke, Ellie, Ben. And for the last 8 years, I'd been the family wallet. It started small, like it always does. A loan for Tessa's first apartment deposit. A temporary payment on my parents' property taxes when Dad miscalculated. Then my farm started doing well. Not rich, but stable. I learned how to save. I learned how to plan. I learned how to pay for repairs without panicking. And my family noticed. They started calling me the responsible one. They said it like it was a compliment, but it was actually a job assignment. Tessa would call crying about a bill. My mom would call with that tight voice about how your sister is stressed. My dad would say, We don't want to ask, but I wired money. I paid invoices. I covered gaps. And every time I did, I told myself I was doing the right thing. because that's what I was raised to believe. Family helps family. But what they meant was, Irvin helps family. It got worse after I got married. Mara saw it early. She'd ask, did they pay you back? And I'd say, not yet. Then a month later, she'd ask again. And I'd say, they will. Then a year later, I'd stop bringing it up because I didn't want to admit I'd been played. Tessa's wedding was when it turned into a system. She wanted everything perfect. She wanted barnwood and chandeliers and a live band and a dessert table that looked like a magazine. My parents acted like it was a royal event, but nobody could pay for it. So they came to me. Dad sat at my kitchen table with his hat in his hands like he was ashamed. Mom cried. Real tears. She said, we don't want your sister to feel less than. Tessa sat there with her arms crossed, pretending she didn't care, but I could see the hunger in her eyes. I paid. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Then there was the house. Just help us get the down payment together, Mom said. They'll refinance later. Then there were the cars. Then there were the emergencies. A hospital bill. A lost job. A delay in Grant's commission. Each time, I helped. Because each time, my parents framed it like I was preventing disaster. And the whole time, there was this other pattern running alongside the money. The way they treated my kids. Little things at first. My parents would buy Tessa's future kids gifts just to be ready someday, but forget Luke's birthday. They'd post family photos online, and somehow my kids were always at the edge, half cut off. Tessa would make jokes about my farm brood, like my children were animals. Mara noticed. I noticed. But I told myself, they'll grow out of it. They'll warm up. It's not worth a fight. Because I didn't want to believe I was paying people who didn't even like us. Then came the last straw. Not the money part. The kid part. My sister didn't just hand me a bill. She handed it to my daughter and made her read it out loud like a joke. That's when the pattern and the moment finally lined up. They weren't just taking my money. They were using my children to keep me in my place. After we left the party, we drove home in silence. The kids fell quiet in that exhausted way they get when they don't understand the adult tension, but they can feel it. Ben fell asleep with his head against Mara's shoulder. Luke stared out the window, jaw tight like he was trying to be grown. Ellie kept rubbing her thumb over a little paper cut she got opening that folder. When we got home, Mara put the kids to bed without saying much. She moved like she was holding herself together by routine. When she came back downstairs, she stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed and said, "Are you done?" Not angry, not dramatic, just exhausted. I nodded, and that's when I made the one clean move I should have made years earlier. I didn't write a long text. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't argue with my parents. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, logged into our bank account, and pulled up the list of automatic transfers. There were more than I liked admitting. A monthly payment to my parents' utility account. I'd set it up after my mom claimed she kept forgetting and got hit with late fees. A weekly transfer to Tessa. She called it temporary support during her career transition. It had been going for 11 months. A payment to the loan I had co-signed for their second car. And one more thing that made my stomach twist. A savings account that had my name and my father's name on it. He'd convinced me to open it together when I was younger, back when he still had that authority voice that made me feel 12. It was supposed to be for family emergencies. It had become their personal cushion. I clicked into each transfer and hit cancel. One by one. Each time, the bank asked, "Are you sure?" And each time, I clicked yes. Then I called the bank's customer line. I asked to remove myself from the joint emergency account and close my access. They transferred me to a specialist. I answered security questions. I listened to hold music while my wife sat across from me and watched like she'd been waiting years for this moment. Finally, the banker said, "Okay, Mr. Larkin, your name will be removed. Future activity will require the remaining account holder's authorization. You'll receive confirmation by email." I hung up. I stared at the confirmation screen. My hands were steady now. Mara reached across the table and put her hand over mine. And I said, out loud, like I needed to hear it myself, "I'm not their backup bank anymore." That was the boundary. One move. Concrete. Done. The fallout started before sunrise. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Irvin, call me. This isn't funny." At 6:18 a.m., another. "Your father is very upset." At 6:25 a.m., "Tessa, you embarrassed me. Fix it." Then Grant, from a number I'd never saved because I didn't like him. "We need to talk like adults." By 7 o'clock, my voicemail was a mess. By 8 o'clock, my dad was pounding on my front door like he owned the place. Luke looked down the hallway and whispered, "Is Grandpa mad?" I swallowed and said, "Go eat breakfast." Mara opened the door before I could. She stood there, calm as stone. My dad pushed forward like he was going to step inside, but Mara didn't move. He stared at her like she was an obstacle he didn't know how to handle. "Where's Irvin?" he demanded. "I'm right here," I said, stepping up behind her. My mom was in the driveway too, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was the victim. Dad didn't say hello. He didn't ask about the kids. He went straight to the point. "We got notices," he snapped. "The utility payment didn't go through. The bank says the emergency account." I removed myself, I said. My mom's eyes flashed. "Why would you do that to us?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list every hurt again. I said one sentence, plain and slow. "I won't fund a family my kids aren't allowed to belong to." My dad scoffed. "That party stunt. That party stunt used my daughter," I said, and my voice went colder than I expected. "You cheered while she read a bill like she was a waitress bringing a check." My mom tried to soften. She always did when anger didn't work. "You know your sister has a sense of humor," she said. I nodded once. "Then she can laugh while she pays her own bills." Dad's face tightened. "We raised you better than this." I looked at him and felt something strange. Not rage. Clarity. "No," I said. "You raised me to be useful, not respected. That ends now." My mom's voice sharpened. "So you're punishing us?" "I'm protecting my kids," I said. "And my wife." Behind me, I heard little footsteps on the hallway floor. Ellie had come out quietly and stood just out of sight, listening. I turned slightly so she could see my face. I wanted her to know. This wasn't about money. This was about her worth. My dad tried the last weapon he had. He pointed at me and said, "You think you can just cut us off? After everything we've done for you?" And that's when I said the line that ended the conversation. "I already paid you back. With interest." Then I stepped forward, not aggressive, just firm, and closed the door. Not a slam. A steady click. Mara locked it. And for the first time in a long time, our house felt like ours. Over the next 3 days, the messages got uglier. Tessa sent paragraphs about how I was unstable, how Mara was controlling, how I was trying to ruin her marriage. Grant called twice and left one voicemail where his voice shook a little. He said, "We can work something out. This doesn't have to get legal." My mom cried in voice notes. My dad threatened to tell everyone what kind of man I really am. Then the lawyer I'd invited to the party, Mr. Dorsey, sent the official demand letter. He didn't send it to scare them. He sent it because that's what consequences look like when you stop playing family games. 72 hours. And they spent those 72 hours doing what they always did. They tried to make me feel guilty enough to fold. But I didn't. Because every time my hand drifted toward my phone, I pictured Ellie holding that folder with her little fingers and reading out $28,000 while grown adults laughed. And I'd think, no? On the fourth day, my aunt called me quietly. Not to guilt me. To tell me something no one else would. "Irvin," she said, "they're panicking. Your sister didn't tell Grant where that money came from. He thought your parents paid for everything." That made me exhale a bitter laugh. Of course. Tessa's whole life was built on someone else footing the bill while she took the credit. By the end of the week, Grant showed up alone. Not at my house. At the edge of my property, near the gravel lane, like he was afraid to come closer. I walked out to meet him because I didn't want my kids seeing him at the door. He looked tired. Real tired. Like the kind of tired I recognized from harvest season. He held his hands up, palms open, and said, "Irvin." I didn't know. I stared at him. Didn't know what. He swallowed. "That you paid for so much." I didn't enjoy his discomfort. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. He looked toward my barn, where Luke was kicking a ball with Ben. Then he said, quietly, "Tessa told me your family helped you out over the years. That you were always taking." I let that sit in the air. Then I said, "And you believed her?" He winced. "I did." I nodded once. "That's your problem." He took a breath. "What do you want?" This was the part people always expected to be dramatic. They expect shouting. They expect revenge. But I had 3 kids inside that barn, and a wife who trusted me to choose peace. So I kept it simple. "I want my name off your mess," I said. "No more transfers. No more co-signing. No more family emergencies that somehow only cost me." Grant nodded slowly. "Okay. And," I added, "you don't use my kids as a punchline again. Ever." He looked down at the gravel like he finally understood the real debt. I'm sorry, he said. I believed him more than I'd ever believed my sister. He walked back to his car without another word. And that was the first real consequence Tessa ever faced. Not the letter, not the numbers, but her husband finally seeing who she was without the glitter on top. The quiet closure didn't come all at once. It came in small scenes. A week later, my parents drove past our house 3 times. We saw the familiar truck on the road. They didn't stop. They wanted us to notice them noticing us. I didn't chase it. 2 weeks later, my mom sent one last text. You're really doing this? Over a joke? I replied with one sentence. Over my kids. Yes. Then I muted the thread. A month later, Luke came home from school with a piece of paper. It was a little all about my dad worksheet. His teacher had them fill it out for a bulletin board. Under my dad works as, he wrote, a farmer. Under my dad is good at, he wrote, fixing things and staying calm. Under my dad always says, he wrote, we take care of our own. I stared at it for a long time at the kitchen table. Mara leaned over my shoulder and kissed my cheek. Ellie walked in, saw me holding it, and asked, are we still doing your birthday? I realized we never really did. That party wasn't for me. It was a stage for Tessa, so we did it right. That weekend, we invited the people who actually showed up for us. Not the loud ones, the steady ones. My cousin Jared came by himself and looked embarrassed when he admitted, I shouldn't have cheered. I didn't think. My aunt came with a casserole and hugged Mara longer than usual. A neighbor brought a pie. We put folding chairs in the barn, strung some cheap lights, and let the kids run around with hot cocoa like it was the best place in the world. Mara made a simple cake. Chocolate, because that's what Ellie had wanted at the party before everything went sideways. Luke taped his drawing on the wall beside the workbench like it was a trophy. When we sang, Ben screamed the words off key. Ellie giggled so hard she snorted, then covered her face and laughed harder. And for the first time, my birthday felt like it belonged to me. Later that night, after the guests left and the kids were asleep, I went outside alone. The winter air was sharp. The barn lights glowed softly behind me. I pulled those paper wristbands out of my pocket. The blue, the pink, wrinkled now, useless. I held them for a second. Then I tossed them into the trash can by the mudroom. Not dramatic. Just done. Inside, Mara was at the kitchen sink washing plates. She looked over at me and said, you okay? I nodded. I am, I said, for the first time in a long time. Because the truth was, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing. And my kids, my quiet, kind kids, finally got something my family never wanted to give them. A father who didn't bargain their dignity for approval. A home where love wasn't a bill. A life where we didn't have to clap for our own humiliation. That was the closure. Not revenge. Self-respect. And a calm, firm line that stayed in place. I'm on Irvin's side here because at his 30th birthday Tessa made Ellie read a $28,000 bill. He answered with a folder of $340,000 receipts for her wedding, house, and cars, and the attorney at the next table set a 72-hour response window. What this story teaches us is that once money is used to control the room, you protect your kids by turning vague help into written terms and hard boundaries. First, document big payments, amount, purpose, and gift versus loan in a dated message or a simple promissory note. Second, secure accounts fast, cancel transfers, exit joint accounts, and keep the deadline in writing. I've been in a smaller version of this, when a temporary favor quietly became expected until I put it in one clear text. What's the lesson you're taking from this one? Would you stop the transfers first or send the 72-hour letter first?